Hello, and this is Hyperborean Radio. In fact, this is the Season 4 finale, and I am the Lore Keeper, and with me, as always, is the Celtic God.
Hey, guys. I'm just here to let you guys know that I fucking hate hippies.
Yes, that he does.
Okay,
truly,
aside
truly
from
does.
that, we got to make sure to remember to let everybody know to hit that subscribe button so that they can come back to our channel, go back and listen to past episodes, and they'll be notified when we come back in, is it 4 weeks?
4, 5, 6, depends on how things work out.
When we get back.
Yes.
When we get back. We're
And
not
you
going to
can-
be gone forever.
And you can keep apprised by following along on Patreon or subscribing on Spotify.
Yep,
Up to you.
And don't be afraid to leave messages in the podcast question things. They're there. I've seen them. I don't know what to call them, but I've seen them. And there's been a couple.
Podcast question things, the very
Yes,
technical term.
it's like, what do you think of this episode? And go ahead and tell us how much you love your favorite podcasters or us. Either way.
And on that note, today we are talking about the lore.
Lore. Yes, we got
Well-
all the important stuff out of the way. Now we talk about lore.
Yes. Well, and lore is, people hear lore, they think like stories or, and it's
it
not,
is, but
well, it's a lot like the word weird. The word is used correctly, but it's the depth and the breadth
the complexity
of
of it has been lost.
Yes. And lore, it can mean many things. It means instruction, it means knowledge, it means stories, lore,
Tradition, the way
Information.
of doing things, the way of being.
and that is the long and the short of it for that. But thing is, lore is extremely broad. It is not just, you can't put all of the lore of our people in a single book.
Well,
It doesn't work.
I want to take the opportunity really early to let everybody know that they do carry lore.
Oh yeah.
Everybody, even people of different species, they all carry lore of their people. So don't undervalue yourself. You do carry lore. You carry lore of things that you did when you was in school, in high school. You carry lore of things that you did when you was in, when you was a little kid, and you went to the place and with your grandparents or your parents or whatever and saw Santa Claus. That is actually part of the lore.
Oh yeah, all the customs. It's like when people ask me, well, how do you do Yule? Well, how do you already do it? Unless you're like Jehovah's Witness or something like that, you probably still do Yule or
Well, and
Colada
even then, being loosely familiar with it because you've seen everybody else do it, so you at least have a loose concept of it.
Precisely. And the thing is, the lore, we say it all the time. We don't have a book. We have libraries. And those libraries aren't literal. Like, they are, but they're not. And that's the beauty of it is, yes, the libraries are like the dead lore, the physical lore, the written down chronicles, histories, stories. How do you do a cross stitch? How do you do a knot of this type? That's all in libraries, but the lore is more than that. It's the traditions of getting married, the why do you do this? Why do you do that? How women and men interact, because the lore can be broken down into pretty much countless subtypes, and it comes down to something as simple as the lore of man, as in the male gender, not the species of man, the race of man, and then the lore of women. And both of these are part of the broader lore of the people, but there's a difference between the man's lore and the woman's lore, and the women are going to view their lore, the lore of women, differently from how the men do. The women have to learn how to be women, how to be a great woman if they can accomplish it. Same with the men have to become great men.
Well, and the thing is like, since you already have the conversation divided, male and female, before we put it back together, even on the same thing, a man and a woman view something that happens. They're going to have two completely different perspectives on the thing that happens.
Well, and bringing those two perspectives together, bringing the man and woman together, makes a family. And then they have to figure out how to interact with their children, other children, their neighbors. And then from there you have the family lore, the lore stretching back, the lore of the community, the lore of the town, the lore of the land, the lore of the sea, the lore of crafts and occupations. It's like the lore of a blacksmith may intersect with the lore of a warrior of war lore versus smithing lore, but they're not the same thing, even if they have constant overlap in certain ways.
And earlier in the conversation you even brought up, and I found this interesting, is blacksmith lore in one area and you have blacksmith lore in another area. They might not be the same lore, even though they're the same thing because of cultural context of that specific tribe or that specific area. So for one, it might be very war-oriented, and their smithing god comes out in the spring before war season, and he sharpens the swords, and he repairs the shields, and all this stuff. And in another area, the smithing god comes out, and he prepares the horseshoes and the tongs and the harnesses and the connections.
Plows.
Yes, they're both they're both smithing deities, and they might even share a smithing deity that does both of these things, like a farming community and a warrior community in Ireland.
Well, and they might be the same community, but there's different subgroups depending on what area you live in, who you're descended from, who you have access to, what are your talents.
Well, because, and I find this weird because this is actually a thing. I've seen smithing lore in, I think it was Germany, where the smith was directly related to boat building. And I'm like, what? This doesn't make any sense. And I kept reading, and what it was is because the smith made the nails, made the connectors, made the hoops and the loops.
All the stuff you need to make the boat.
Yes.
Unless you go like full, just get a big tree and carve it out. Into
and specifically in the context that I was reading in, it was warships. That doesn't mean he didn't help make fishing vessels, but the focus in that context of what I was reading was warships. But there was something else, too, that we was talking about, which I want to get this out of the way really quick, is with the lore. You have let's use a deity as a descriptor. You read from one specific angle, and the deity is, I don't know. The deity is really great at making porridge. I'm just making something up, just as an example. But it's kind of like a person, like you yourself. If I describe you, there's going to be one description, right? And it's going to be accurate, but then your mother might describe you. Her description is also going to be accurate, but it's going to be a completely different description from myself. And then there's a third party. Let's pull random person Jake out of the audience. Jake, we see you. I don't know who you are, Jake, but you're the example today. But he too knows you in this example, and he describes you. So to get a full picture, you need more than one view of this individual, a deity in the case of this example, or a human, you, also a case in this example. But just because you're described this way by these three people, and then you got a guy named Matt, I guess. He lives 3,000 miles away. You've never seen him. For all I know, 3,000 miles is in the middle of the ocean. So he lives in the middle of the ocean. He can be described exactly like you. He is not you, like in that one book that you read.
Well, it's like Fred versus Friedrich.
Yes.
They both have the same job. They're both the same age. They both look relatively the same. But Fred lives in England and Friedrich lives in Munich. They're not the same person, even with that many similarities.
Right. So you got to be careful of these things. And all of this is actually a lore.
Well, and part of the issue, and this always kind of messes people up, is the deity just the deity, or is it many figures? And the answer is yes. Like Vesna is also a set of spirits for the Slavs. Krampus is also a set of spirits for the Alpines. There's 100 Brigids. Which Brigid are we talking about? Depends on the context. Yes. Well, and then they all just got stuffed into Saint Bridget, which is why she's like super saint.
Right.
And that's the other thing.
She's like, what is that, Ray Palpatine? She does it all.
She does it all. She's got the Force is female, yo. But And that's the thing, is all of this lore is interconnected, and it's, if you are, for instance, from a tribe of fishermen, and then another individual is from a tribe of mountain hunters, just to get as far from the two as I can, why would you both see the deity of the sea on the same level of importance? Why would you have the same stories of the sea? For all I know, there's a mountain tribe somewhere who has a story about how the sea god fucking hates them for some reason, and is the reason they're now living up in the mountains.
Or maybe their god had beat back the god of the sea, which is why they have this huge mountains, because the sea ran so far away. This is actually a possibility. I don't know if that's actually lore out there, but it is a possibility for lore.
Well, and the gods and the people are interconnected, but it's just like you don't necessarily get along with your neighbor as well as someone else might. Mm-hmm. You might not even understand how your neighbor hasn't been hit with a pan over the head enough to not be able to talk very well yet.
And maybe he doesn't.
But there might be somebody else that absolutely adores this individual. The same is true for divine entities, and the same is true for historical figures. The same is true for spirits. It's like we said, each of these beings has their own personalities. Do you know anyone who gets along with everyone? Even the person who is just popular with almost everybody will have someone who hates them because they're popular with everybody.
Yes. I mean, even just take a look at yourself. Some people adore you, other people can't stand you, and you can't figure out why either one is the case. Like, you might look in the mirror and be like, I am a complete asshole. Why do these people love me so much? And I just can't get them to leave me alone. And then I'm really kind and outgoing with these other people, but no matter what I do, they hate me. Who knows? It's just a way of life.
Well, and the thing is, let's go back to the boat example. Like the smiths makes the nails, which goes into the boat. In Germany, there's actually a deity known as the Klabotermann. The Klabotermann isn't a single deity; it's like a class.
Oh yes,
it's the spirit of a ship. But here's
the one
thing.
That's usually children, right?
Sometimes. That's the odd thing about Klabotermann is, like most, just like house spirits. Is it a dead ancestor?
Yeah,
is
it must be the Gale in me grabbed a hold of the children part.
That is one version, though. The Klabotermann, sometimes it's the soul of the ship. So it's the ship, because of the affection and the use, eventually has a spirit.
Right, like
that's
the sailors themselves imbue a spirit into
or
the
attract
ship.
one, depending on how you want to view it. And then there's also the viewpoint of, this is more in line with like the brownies and the tomte and the domovoy, of it being the spirit of a dead ancestor. Is the Klabotermann are the spirits of children who died and were buried under trees, and then that tree was cut down and used to make the boat. That's one version of it, and that ties into tree lore, which ties into burial lore,
because it's giving the child a second go.
Yeah.
A chance at adventure.
Well, that's part of the reason the spirit, if you look at the lore, the spirits are so intertwined, is while not all of them are the souls of our ancestors, a lot of them are. Like the Perchten, a lot of them are ancestors that chose to help the goddess Perchta. The brownies, the fairy godmothers, the tomte, the domovoy, they're spirits of the home or spirits of different areas that are there, that are from your family.
Well, and the ethnic way circles, I guess I'll word it that way. There has tendency to be focus on deities and spirits as far as lore goes. But we can't forget about lore of this battlefield or that battlefield, this great hero, this lonely mother, this widow, this child who was lost, the lore of the guy that caught the biggest fish off the coast of...
Well, or the big fish itself.
Yes.
It's actually one of my favorite movies, is the movie Big Fish.
Well, it's it's actually an excellent lesson in this topic. If you haven't watched it, I suggest that you do.
Basically, the long and the short of the story is this man has spent his whole life telling tall tales larger than life about himself. And they're true to a point. Like, he'll talk about how he parachuted into Vietnam or something, into the base full of Charlies, and he gets helped by a couple of Siamese twins that he helps come back to America and make it big because he helped someone get big on Wall Street, and they're able to help them out and stuff like that. I might have misremembered a couple of things.
Either way.
But it's revealed towards the end of the movie that this did happen. This was the one thing that he definitely made up, though. It wasn't Siamese twins. It was normal twins.
Right.
So he embellished a little, but on something that literally doesn't matter. Was it Siamese twins or was it actual twins? For the purposes of his story, it's irrelevant.
Well, and another thing that you've recently noticed, recently being like within the last year, is it's the through line that matters. Do details matter? Yes, but also no.
Well, it's like the
details only matter if it's attached to the through line. Like in general, the color of the shirt doesn't matter.
Unless it does.
Unless it does.
Well, it's like a good example that we typically use is Othin's eye. Mm-hmm. Othin is, according to the lore, consistently one-eyed. I think we instinctively know this because whenever people call him Wotan, we have a tendency to give him two eyes. Same
or
with
any
Woden.
other any
of the other names that are supposedly him. Othin specifically has one eye, and he always loses it to knowledge.
Of some kind.
Yes, in the pursuit of knowledge. Now, how that happens
varies widely.
Yes, he can tear it out. Someone else can tear it out. It can be pecked out. All that we know is he specifically loses the eye for that reason. And here's the question: why would we know?
Yeah.
It's like if you met someone and then 5 years later you meet them again and they're missing an eye. Well, they could tell you the truth. You know, I lost it because it got poked out by an umbrella in a little martini I was drinking. Well, or they can embellish a bit and be like, I lost it fighting off a rattlesnake or something like that.
Well, that's like I have a rather large scar, and people ask me about the scar, and I wish I could give them a better story. And in the end, I think I do give them like the perfect story because they always enjoy it, is because it's a big scar. And they're expecting some big heroic, story attached to it. And my story begins, when you was a kid and your mom told you not to play rough in the house, don't play rough in the house. And it's always like I slapped them in the face with that. And then they start laughing, and then they really want to know what happened. I was roughhousing in the house, got cut. Really bad.
On an example of the reverse where you end up feeding him a line of bullshit. First of all, there's one of my favorite myths, the myth of Conan's hairy back.
Oh, yes.
I love that.
But these stories, the line of shit is best run by the tertiary person.
Oh, yeah.
Like with Conan and his
hairy back.
And his hairy back. The story is best told by, I don't know, you gave an excellent example of it once in one of our podcasts where you got Conan sitting over there and he's got the really hairy back, and the kid looks at the guy sitting next to him and he's like, man, why is his back so hairy? Oh, you have a turd.
Yes. Or all of Scotland and the wild haggis.
Oh, yes. All of Scotland and the wild haggis.
Or one of our friends, he has a scar on his leg. He got it, I think, in a fairly mundane way. But he always runs the same line of shit where he got it protecting his wife from a grizzly bear attack, and he wrestled and killed the bear.
Right.
And it's the mark of his battle. And, of course, he tells everyone that. So now...
Well, and it was a battle of sorts.
Yes.
Just not with a grizzly bear.
No. And he might actually just call it a bear, and I myself upped it to grizzly bear.
Right.
So now it's the biggest extinct bear.
I think that he does just call it a bear and doesn't specify what kind, so then you, again, followed the rule of lore. You embellished on it, but you didn't actually change it.
Well, it's like, did Davy Crockett, I think it is, or is it Daniel Boone? I always mix those two up, which does happen.
Crap, I don't know. I'm trying to remember.
The one that actually fought like a bear and beat it.
Yeah, killed a bear when he was 8 years old. There's a song. I think it's Daniel Boone.
It's Davy Crockett.
It's
Davy Crockett. It's Davy Crockett. Well, and Daniel Boone, or is it Davy Crockett? Again, these two figures, because I'm not from the area where they're big, I don't know their stories by rote. But one of them actually got to the point, and these are historic figures.
Mm-hmm. There was real people.
That they were referred to as the god of the pioneers.
Mm-hmm.
The church complaining about the heathens heading out west should become clear now.
Some whisperings about it while they were still alive. Mm-hmm. And that's why they got left out to fucking dry at the Alamo.
Oh, well, it's like, what's it called?
There's somebody that famously said, let their God save them.
Oh. That is, man, that's dark.
It is. It's brutal.
Well, they've done it before. Like General Custer got let out to dry. That's why he lost at Little Bighorn.
Yes.
Why? Because he was too well liked. He was too talented. He was learning too fast.
Well, and what other kinds of lore does people know? Grandma's secret recipe to
Grandma's recipe. The
whatever.
swamp monster down by the lake. Why the mountain is like that. What to do when you see a bear. How to take care of horses. How to take care of dogs. You'll have different lore depending on where you live, and some of it's mundane, like this is how you train a dog, this is how you hunt a deer, this is how you go fishing, this is how you greet a lady, this is how you be polite, this is why you're polite.
Well, and you can't just type in folklore of and get all the information, because like with some of the deities, for instance, you dig extensively into folklore, and you're like, well, where did you learn this part of Cernanos, for instance? And I'm like, well, you're not going to find it in the folklore because it's actually in local traditions, local history.
Local customs.
Local customs. And it's referenced actually in writing, but not in folklore writing. It's in history and traditions writings.
Well, it's like Surtur. Surtur being the volcano god. There's little bits here and there if you start digging into written stuff. But the people there, not all of them, but the people there are the ones that will say, yeah, Surtur is the volcano god. He is this god of Iceland.
Yeah.
And then you have instances like Frau Halla. A lot of people will just go, Halla's a wicked witch.
With the Surtur one, what I love is some of those videos where they're like, where's Surtur? And they'll point at the volcano, right? And they're, well, I heard Surtur was a god. Yes, he's inside the volcano. So you believe in Surtur the god? Well, I don't know because I haven't seen him stand up.
The lack of disbelief.
Yes, a lack of disbelief. Like, maybe.
Well, and that's the thing is a lot of traditions are told like for instance, there's the example that your great uncle did, where there was this great storm coming in.
Oh,
with,
yeah,
with
where
Thor,
he's trying to get me to say Thor the right way.
Because Thor is
And I still don't say it
heavily
right,
modernized.
by the way. I
It's
say
more
it the
like,
same way as everybody else.
well, that's partly why the whole. Well, you see, Thor is related as a word to this other word, whatever. It's the sound of thunder. It's Thor, and I can't do it.
Right.
Most people can't do it, but it's that sound of just
From my
rumbling
perspective,
thunder.
he's like, it's not Thor, it's Thor. No, not Thor, Thor. I couldn't tell the difference, and he was getting so angry at me, and even trying to explain it's not the crack of the thunder, it's not the lightning, it's that moment in between where you can feel that, you can feel it coming.
Oh yeah.
And he's like, that's Thor. And I'm like, Thor? He says, no, Thor! What's wrong with you? Why can't you say it? I still don't know what the difference is.
Well, and that's the thing is little things like that, or pointing at a bird and saying that too is a child of the hunter, and not like an eagle or a falcon or a heron,
but a sparrow,
but a little tiny house sparrow. Or in America we have the forest god Paul Bunyan, and there's areas where the story is literally like, you see that right there? Paul Bunyan made that.
Yeah.
These stories get lost, and that's the other thing is lore, because it's a living thing and it needs people to keep it alive. And yes, there are entities within the lore that exist, whether the lore is there or not, but do we know about them? Would we recognize them if we saw them? And there are things that we've lost already in the lore. Like, for instance, one big thing is a lot of European martial arts. We still have them, like boxing, catch wrestling. There's several different ones.
Some of it's being recreated through like HEMA.
But not incredibly well, because the treatises, while they show
They're more guidelines.
They show how to do the moves, but not why, the context of how they're used. So people...
Well, and here's the thing, is the authors of these treatises, they tried. They tried to make it painfully clear, and it probably was to the people of the time. However, we're picking them up centuries after the fact.
Well, it's like Othin. There's a story where he turns into an eagle and flies away in the Eddas, right? Mm-hmm. People are like, oh, the great grand eagle,
right, and
king
they're
of
looking
birds.
at typically from the American or the Roman perspective.
The late Roman perspective.
Where
the eagle is this majestic...
powerful thing.
Yes. No. During that time period, the eagle was a scavenger. It was like a vulture.
Anybody that has experience around eagles know Eagles are scavengers.
Scavengers
Well, actually,
and
most predators are actually scavengers.
Well, it gets lumped in with the raven and the wolf, starting to make sense why.
One of my favorite stories, though, is it was of, I'm not sure if it's the Gauls, but it's northern tribesmen, anyways, mocking the Romans and their eagle standard, and they was flapping their arms and making like seagull sounds. That's fucking hilarious. Because they was calling the Romans fearful scavengers. All they do, they're just scavengers.
Well, and seagulls are actually probably more brutal than eagles.
Oh, without a doubt.
I mean,
without a doubt.
Well, and the funny thing is while seagulls don't look cool, they're not dumb birds.
No.
Like there are seagulls that figure out how to get like the move.
Incredibly brutal.
Oh yeah, well they'll attack things to get food from them because if that thing's eating it, that means it must be good. Or they'll actually figure out how to open.
Here's how brutal a seagull is. You have an eagle. It actually caught its prey. It lands. It caught its prey as in like a fish, and it lands on the beach. And the seagull comes along and drives the damn eagle away.
Moin.
The eagle, yeah, moin. The eagle is many times larger than the seagull, but the seagull wins the fight. What?
And you could say, well, it's just sheer stupidity willing to take it on. But then they're also smart enough to figure out how moving doors work, like the ones that open to stores. Mm-hmm. Get it to open, or wait until someone else.
Until a person comes.
If it won't open for them, walk into the store, steal a bag of chips, and walk back out.
Yeah, and don't be greedy because then you'll get caught.
Well, and then they're not pushovers either because seagulls will eat squirrels. Mm-hmm. They will catch squirrels, which are hard to catch for even like falcons and stuff, and swallow them whole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you realize that birds have a tendency to eat their prey alive, that's brutal.
Well, and especially when you realize that seagull is the same size as the squirrel.
Yeah, that's a whole new level of fucked up. Anyways, back to lore because
that
was
lore.
That is lore.
That was the lore of seagulls. You're welcome. They're horrifying.
Yes. Horrifying rats on wings.
Which brings us to pigeons, which are not rats on wings.
No.
They're actually fairly sweet, understanding birds.
They're stupid, but still incredibly intelligent, and they're really adaptable. So that means that they're very hardy, and they're very what's that word? Mutagenic. It's so yes, there are always pigeons. Well, they're stupid because this type of pigeon is now extinct. Yes, it is, but it actually just turned into this other kind of pigeon.
And probably turned into 7 other kinds of pigeons.
Probably. And partridges are basically pigeons.
And so were rock doves and on and on and on. Well, rock doves are pigeons.
Yeah.
But the passenger pigeon, who knows? It probably just mutated into a close enough pigeon that it bred with the ones we brought over here.
Which one's the one that went extinct over here? Passenger pigeons.
Yeah.
It probably turned into both the partridge and the gray pigeon that you see in the cities.
Probably.
Which the gray pigeons in cities are big and brutal.
Oh, yeah.
Like they will actually fight with rats.
And probably win.
Well, they do sometimes. Sometimes they lose. But they're big enough to fight with rats, and rats can kill cats.
Yeah.
Now, wrap your mind around that shit.
Yeah, rats are consummate survivors.
I mean, it is what it is, and all of this is lore. The way that you tie your shoes, for instance, is not necessarily the way somebody else ties their shoes, and people will have little stories like the fox chases the rabbit around the tree, and then the rabbit dives into the hole, and then you pull it tight and there's your bow. Other people will have the rabbit ears or the crisscross applesauce, whatever the fuck it is that they do with the way some people tie their shoes really weird.
Well, it's like there's different stories for how we get certain things. And it doesn't fully matter which it is. Like, just in Germanic folklore, there's one story where Frau Holda gave people flax as a gift. And it was... The story goes that a man was given the opportunity to choose among many gifts. And this is in a jewel-encrusted cave. And he chooses the flowers that she's holding. And she's like, you chose well. and she blesses the flax, and then he grows flax, and then
Am I
there's
the
flax.
only person that wouldn't choose her as a wife? I'd be like, I choose you as my wife.
That probably would have been the number one choice, but he was already married and didn't probably.
It wouldn't have mattered. Wife,
then-
get used to this.
Well, then there's another story where it's from spiders.
Right.
Prince Spinhead, a spider prince. It gives it as a wedding gift to Snow White. Is the flaxseed, is the flax plant, and how to use it and how to weave it.
Well, and now that we're firmly in the middle, we can, where most people, they're going to skip over this, so only the most dedicated people get to hear this part. There's some people are finally starting to understand you have to stop. You can't just dive in all academic. You can't just dive in all blind belief, but that you have to heal. You have to heal and so that you can then come to understand things and understand your people, et cetera, et cetera. But the one thing, and I'm not sure who it was, is you or William or somebody had said something about the hardest part is actually being honest with yourself about who you are
And what you want.
right and what you want. And this is part of it. Like, you can figure out the lore and the context of it simply by observing, but you have to run it through a lens. To run it through a good, healthy lens, first you have to heal. But to heal, you have to be honest with yourself about who you are, what you want, who your friends are, who your mother is, who your father is. And I don't mean Fran and George. I mean, who are they? What makes them tick? And realizing that even if you don't like them, they aren't necessarily malicious. They might be. And that might be part of the honesty that you have to come to terms with. But odds are they're probably not malicious. There's very few of us that's malicious in that way.
Well, it's a lot like stupid people aren't necessarily malicious for the sake of being malicious. In fact, that's part of why if they do something that kind of messes stuff up, that they're
By effect, it doesn't matter. By act of intention, it does.
yes.
So an act can be malicious but done innocently.
Well, it's like sometimes something that's not even malicious can cause repercussions that were never expected.
Mm-hmm.
Like the white wedding dress in our customs. It's actually fairly new, the white wedding
Queen
dress.
Victoria, I think.
It was either Queen Victoria or Queen Elizabeth II. I always...
This is one of them. It's
It
one
was-
of those damn queens.
Yeah, it wasn't the first Elizabeth. I know that.
Yeah.
That was
no,
way
no,
far
that
away.
was too long
I think
ago.
it was Elizabeth II, though. But,
Is that the one that just died?
yeah, the one that just
Yeah,
died.
about 400 years ago when she was young. And
Sure.
she rode a dinosaur.
If you believe the internet.
Yes.
But basically, that's where the white wedding dress came from. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't malevolent.
She did not intend for
it to become a standard that everybody had to have a white wedding dress.
and a $16,000 wedding dress.
Oh, yeah, when the weddings...
What the hell?
Yeah, weddings aren't necessarily supposed to be, unless you're just stupid wealthy, and then it's a show of wealth.
Well, and it's not just that. It's an obligation at that point. Because, again, if you read history, you can go back and see where some of the brides were lamenting the fact that they had to have a big wedding. They couldn't have...
A small one.
Right. Like, they bemoaned that they couldn't have the peasant wedding with just their parents and a few close friends in a hidden grove far away from sight. No, they had to have 10,000 guests with 50,000 goats and...
All basically eat themselves out of house and home before they got a house and home.
Yeah.
Well, it's like a lot of these customs and traditions around weddings. Because I think it's called the Chesterton fence or something.
Yes.
But basically it's don't destroy or get rid of a tradition if you don't understand it. And then if you do understand it, consider, should we keep it?
Right.
Because most traditions exist for a reason. And when people don't know the reason, they're like, especially if the reason's fallen off and it's just aesthetic. Like, for instance, the groomsmen the are supposed to be bodyguards.
Right. And I am all for groomsmen. But have them be what they're supposed to be. They're supposed to be the bodyguards, the bouncers, the protectors of the wedding party and the guests. that is their function.
Well, it's like
get them fucking bulletproof vests.
Well, it's like bridesmaids. I forget. I think they're supposed
or
to be
bullet-resistant vests. There's no bulletproof anything.
They're body doubles for the wife. I think they're also
kind of hand servants, but without the servant part.
Yes. Whereas nowadays, it's the ongoing joke that the bridesmaid is there to wear the ugliest dress possible to make the bride look pretty. That's new. Or speak now or forever hold your peace. That used to actually be a thing where someone could actively challenge.
And here's the thing. That used to be a thing to stave off war. Because now the duel, there will be negotiations, something will happen. And that was inserted at one point because, I don't know, Princess of Germany, Prince of England get married. But the Prince of France was courting the Princess of Germany. Well, she married the Prince of England. This could literally lead to a fucking war. I don't remember if that's actually something that happened or not. There's a lot of war history.
Well, and that's the other thing.
But it could potentially lead to real war. It's like the joke about the Irish. It's not a real wedding unless there's a war and at least 3 deaths.
Yep, and there is not a true Irish funeral if at least 3 babies aren't made.
Right.
And then back to the wedding example, just because it's just the customs around this. The procession used to be the wife walks, the bride walks from her point of origin, her home, all the way to
where she marries the husband.
Yes, which is typically the husband's home.
In a straight line.
Yes, as straight as she can muster. And in some cases, these were legendary examples of cutting a tree down and breaking rocks so they don't go around, which is allowed.
Or carving tunnels. It all depended on the dedication and the resources of the woman in question.
Yes, and then here's the thing is, that's the procession. There's also the gauntlet where the whole speak now or forever hold your peace. That kind of descends from that. You're supposed to go through the gauntlet, and if there's anyone that challenges you, either because they want the woman, or they think she's not good enough for you, or you're not good enough for her,
this is their chance to stop the wedding.
Yeah, and in some cases, actually kill you.
Right, if need be, yeah. And then in other cases, it was just token. Like, oh, everybody agrees with this marriage.
But we got to rough you up so it looks good.
Yeah, we can't just let you through.
Well, and then those are just some examples. Everybody's going to have different customs. Like there's one where women had to tie a rope, like a certain length of rope to prove they had the weaving skills. Or
an American one was making a quilt before they was eligible to be wed.
It was part of the dowry is the woman had to have made 3 quilts by that point before they got married. And that's the other thing is the dowry actually mattered, and it was choice, except for political instances where you're kind of just expected to marry for political reasons.
Well, most people they're aware of like the upper echelon, the nobilities, the rich people's stuff, and they try to apply it to
the common folk.
No,
it doesn't work.
It's not that way. It's like arranged marriages. Arranged marriages. It's not that there wasn't arranged marriages for the common folk, but it's different from, leaders of nations.
Well, and then another example of something that doesn't quite work out is the what's it called? The engagement period. That's actually a trial marriage. Mm-hmm. You're supposed to act as husband and wife, not fiance, husband and wife, or man and wife, up until that point, and even try to get pregnant to see if you can.
Right. Well, because sometimes you can have 2 perfectly fertile people that just can't have children with each other. And it doesn't mean that they can't get married. It's just now they are aware
of the consequences.
Yeah, if you do get married, you probably aren't having children.
Well, and then there's the honeymoon. The honeymoon was actually, I think it was named as such because you were given honey mead. Mm-hmm. And the goal, it was actually typically, I think, for couples that didn't know each other too well. So these were probably more upper class weddings.
Right.
And basically what happened was it was a bunch of booze and a month basically left alone to get to know each other, and the drink is to get things moving.
Well, and here's something I noticed with many of the writings where people will talk about these wedding customs, for instance, or the coupling customs. It was the rich people writing about it, so they're writing about what it is that they're doing. On occasion, you will hear something where I truly wish I could be but like the peasant. and marry for love. I wish I could be but like the peasant and have a small wedding. I wish I could be like the peasant and but.
Well, it's like it wasn't all.
And sometimes it was also sneering at him, like.
Well, some of the rich people. This was an odd custom, I think, in the French royal family. But when they got married, they had to have a public consummation.
Yeah, that one's weird.
I mean, it was to try
Reminds
and guarantee.
me of that Pope. Some people like this and some people like that. But this guy, he liked watching horses fuck.
Yes, and because the Pope did it, you know the Catholics liked it because that's how that religion works.
Yes, even if they didn't like it, they had. It's a thing now.
Apparently.
I guess we watch horses fuck because the Pope does, and we're Catholic or something.
Well, neither of us are Catholic, so we don't have to worry about that.
But that's what the people of the time was saying was, well, I guess this is
a
a thing now.
But those are all just customs around one thing. That's the lore of weddings, which ties into the lore of governance, the lore of community, the lore of families, the lore of man, the lore of woman. There's different customs all over the place, which is why we often speak in broad brushstrokes. And here's the thing, is all of those things could be completely avoided potentially. I would argue that specifically the gauntlet and the procession are good to have just to prove that the two actually want to get married.
Right.
But the most basic level of marriage in our customs is literally just the trading of oaths.
Yeah.
And here's the thing is husband and wife and man and wife, these are two different statements.
Well, and really contracts and government has no business
in marriage.
And
in the family.
Marriage, in the family, yeah. It just
none of that belongs there.
People want to talk about the destruction of the family. And I know some people out there are listening has probably just dropped off. So whatever. But people want to talk about the destruction of the nuclear family, of the family unit. When government gets involved and makes it a fucking contract, that drives a wedge into the family immediately before it even occurs.
Well, and the destruction of lore that happens is because you are told not to believe your own eyes and to not listen to the people that have actually experienced things. That's how lore dies. All it took in America, at least, was one generation that said, fuck everyone that came before us. We're just going to do things our way.
Yeah.
And that has sent everything since then into a freaking tailspin.
I'm sure everybody's heard this before. The past must, forget the past. Kill it if you must.
Yeah, that spell has been repeated across so much media. But I want to finish this off with the wedding thing really quick is wife just means woman and husband means head of household. When you say man and wife, you're saying man and woman. When you're saying husband and wife, you're saying head of household and his woman.
Yes.
A woman can actually be a husband. That's why there's the term husbandry, or taking care of the head of the household, of taking care of the animals. It's important to know those words because when you call someone your woman, you're calling them your wife.
Right. And it is not women, it is not derogatory for somebody to say that you're your man's woman. It is not derogatory for you to say that you are your man's woman.
Any more than it is for you to say
Feminists
that's my
hate
man.
You. Yeah. It's not derogatory to say that he is your man or he is her man. Feminists hate people because they're just miserable cunts. They're old, ugly, miserable cunts that failed at life, and they want you to fail too. This is both the males and the females.
Well, there's two different reasons, two core reasons that I've noticed for changing lore. One is power. You know, you come in, you tell everyone the way they're doing things are wrong. You need to listen to you. Mm-hmm. Listen to me. I'm the one that knows how to do everything. And then everyone, the priest. And then there's usually a famine and a bunch of people die, and then he kind of walks it back a bit.
Right.
Or here's the other option. This is the other most common reason I've seen throughout history, throughout just observation of life. Misery loves company. Give people bad advice or treat people like shit until they actually are doing the same things you are, because you feel awful and you hate what you did to yourself, so you want other people to suffer with you.
So you feel justified in your bad
decisions. Zealotry.
Yeah.
The tyrant and the zealot.
It's horrible. And as far as the pollution, destruction of lore, Tinkerbell is actually one of the worst, because she's
She's beloved.
Yeah, because she's beloved. See, what Disney did, okay. Disney took a sprite named Tinkerbell, which would be a traditional sprite's name. A tinker's bell, the sound that the tinker's bell makes, which is just a little bitty bell. Ding, 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 ding. And they called her a fairy so that they could copyright her. But she is still a sprite. Everyone thinks that's a fairy. Even the fairy with the wings were big up until recently.
Well, and
they were big but with wings. And okay, I get it. You need to somehow indicate the difference between the fairy and the humans. And you're no longer allowed to use the halo of light because the Christians do that, and then you're being a heretic if you do that. So wings. The small fairy, it was before Tinkerbell, but in the movie that cemented it. Before that, it was understood either way. It is kind of an umbrella term, but now Tinkerbell has cemented the fairy into being this little sprite.
Well, it's like sprites are basically very tiny fae that are essentially elements.
Kind of, yeah.
Kind of like there's the frost sprites that hang around.
Some of them set dew. Some of them ride or bring the rays of sunlight early in the morning. Some of them ride on dust or dandelion seeds.
Well, and a name with like Tinkerbell. Tinkerbell's probably a sound sprite, a sprite associated with music or noise.
Yeah, the lightness of the heart.
Yes, and that's the thing is because the lore is so vast. It's like we did a whole podcast via Negativa on how the lore is so broad. It's easier to describe what it's not than what it is.
Yeah,
and that is why fantasy, fiction, all of this brings the lore forward. Like the weirding women in Dune. Or the Dogda as Hagrid.
I want to do a quick little self-plug here for HyperboreanRadio.com, where there's going to be two sections. There's going to be the Boreal Punk section, and there's going to be the archive section.
The framing device and the...
Versus the lore.
Yeah.
The archive is going to be the lore, the research, the results of our research, and some stuff that we're still working on research-wise, to be honest. If we get far enough, we're trying to upload it as we go, as well as putting backlog in there. But then you got the Boreal Punk side. The Boreal Punk side is a fictional story based on the real-world lore, based on which includes real-world history.
And observations and all those things.
Yes. Different traditions and customs, but it's set in a fictional setting. So the reason why we're doing that is because there's a responsibility on the storyteller's side to tell an accurate story. You can lie your ass off to tell the truth, if that makes sense.
Well, it's also it's because the best stories are always true, even if they're lies.
Yeah,
and that's also why good writers, good singers, good artists of any kind are rarely, if ever, people that lived uneventful lives. They are people that went out and experienced life. Now, what form that takes can vary. Some people traveled the world. Some people traveled the country. Some people fought in wars. Some people had an adventurous home life. Some people were just huntsmen. Some people were pillars of the community. Some people were insane.
Well, and here's another bit of lore for you. Most musicians will understand what I'm saying. Some other people will also understand, and many people is going to disagree. There are certain songs that can only be performed well by women. Some songs can only be performed well by men. Only part of this has to do with the tone of voice. Most of it has to do with perspective. There are some songs that can only be performed well by somebody who has had their heart broken. There are some songs that can only be performed well by people who have never had their heart broken.
And there are some songs that can only be performed by people who are so old they know the woe of being the last one left alive.
Yes.
There are some that can only be sung by people who are still young and innocent in their ways. And on and on and on. There are just... and here's the thing. Songs, people have to come up with them. They aren't necessarily given by the gods. This isn't necessarily the song that Broggy wrote, and here you go.
Well, and here's another thing about, and it's lore of music, but you write a song. let's say that you write a hit song about, when you wrote it, it was about the joy of eating your grandmother's cookies. But you don't talk specifically about your grandmother's cookies. What you're talking about is the way that you felt and the relationship between you and your grandmother. Never even named your grandmother or even said the word grandmother in it. You released this out into the wilds. All of a sudden, groups of people are like, oh, wow, the song hits hard, because he's singing about the forlorn love that was lost. It doesn't matter what you wrote it about. Once you release it, that's what the song became.
Yes, it's like the part of the mistake a lot of artists, especially today, are making is they become overly greedy. Like, I'm all for protecting what you made, but if other people aren't able to expand on it, breathe life into it.
Let's be honest, 70 years, the current copyright laws, it's enough to completely kill songs.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's why some of the most popular things increasingly are the stuff that's in public domain. Frickin' Pinocchio, of all things, is having a frickin' renaissance lately.
Mm-hmm.
It's because people are able to add to it. They're able to continue it. It's like Lovecraft was a genius for this. He encouraged people to actually take what he wrote and expand upon it, add to it. And in less than, I think he died like less than a century ago. I don't know the exact details, and he's already a legend. He's influential the world over for his stories.
Well, in many ways, I hope with what we're doing with storytelling, once we tell our story, which will take a while, I'm hoping that we inspire people to then follow the fucking canon, hold to the canon that's set, and then write their own stories based in that world. That'd be awesome for the same thing that happened for us, that happened for Star Wars before Disney fucking killed it, that happened for Lovecraft, that happened for
Marvel, that happened to DC, that happened to Lord of the Rings.
For Robert Howard.
Robert E. Howard. Sword and Sorcery effectively was birthed by him.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how these things grow. And here's the thing is, when it comes to the broad lore, the lore of our lives, the lore of all these things, usually we're so close to it we can't see the forest for the trees. Like, we have talked to people from Europe, like whether they're Swedish or whether they're English or Spanish, Bulgarian, and basically pointed out, you have just crud tons of lore.
Mm-hmm.
Right at your fingertips. You just got to peel off some of the gunk that's accumulated over universalism or foolishness, and you have something complete right there. You already know it.
But here's something that they don't want Americans, Brazilians, Australians, et cetera, to know. You have lore too.
Yes.
Our people, wherever we go, have lore. It's not necessarily what was behind in Europe. It is linked to that, though. But we also create new lore, which they don't have. Well, and fortunately, like, some of them will see the value in Paul Bunyan and be like, Paul Bunyan is the man.
Or I've gotten people to be jealous from Europe over Puxatawny Phil.
Yeah.
This freaking groundhog.
Yes.
And the legitimately
his role
jealous.
is just fucking amazing. Well, what does your God do? He tells the weather.
Not well.
So all the time? Well, no, only once a year. So he's right, though, right, when he tells the weather. Well, no, he's only got like a 30% accuracy rate. So he's not he's not a very good God. Oh no, he's fantastic, but
there's a whole.
But he's not accurate. Well, that doesn't matter.
Well, and here's the thing: is it's the groundhog, and Puxatawny Phil. The way I would describe it is, it's like the Oracle of Delphi. The most famous oracle of a deity is Puxatawny Phil.
Right.
But actually, by the lore, the groundhog itself, what's his name? The groundhog.
Yes.
Is the deity, and this is the funniest thing is. It's like when people get kind of fetishizing of a lot of, like, the Native American coyote and bear and eagle and bison. They went on picnic. It was good. You know, that kind of stuff.
We've looked up a lot of the supposed lore, and it turns out it's
a good chunk.
Hyperborean lore for the most part.
A good chunk of it's made up. A good chunk of it is straight up ripped off from Europe and just given a Native American twist.
It's white people claiming to be telling Indian stories, to be quite blunt.
Well, and then you have
Or the Great Spirit.
but
That's directly traced to the Christians.
well, or there's the fox god Reynard, who was the most popular figure for 1,000 years in Europe. Most people don't even know who he is right now. But
But you know him when you see him.
well, we have plenty of animal lore alone, and then
There's a reason why these cartoons are popular.
There's a
it's because it's a toss back to something that we've been doing not for decades, not for centuries, but for millennia.
Well,
we
and-
have been doing this.
oh yeah, well it's like Disney's Cinderella, Disney's Sleeping Beauty. A lot of these stories are just straight up using stuff, and it's the thing is they know it even if we don't. Like the Disney Sleeping Beauty straight up refers to her loosely as a spring goddess. They know what they're doing.
Well, and advertisers do it too, and they know what they're doing. They're appealing to the instinctual side of their audience.
Oh yeah, was it Quilted Northern where they had
The three ladies?
weavers?
Yeah,
The
I think that was Quilted Northern.
And-
But it's a fun game to go through the grocery store and identify the European gods. The easiest place to find them is in the booze aisle.
Oh yeah, we love to put our gods on booze, not just Dionysus, but like all of them.
All of them. It doesn't matter. All of them. Like, I don't know, Bridget's wine or something. She's not really
They
noted
really
for
like
making
to
wine,
use
but
Fae
okay.
too.
Yes. But that's the easiest place to find it. But you can find them in the various food aisles. You can find them in the dairy section. You can find them in the paper and accessory aisles.
And the thing is, we're
they're
so
everywhere.
close to it, we don't even realize it, because part of the issue is we speak English. What are our gods' names going to be?
Yeah.
They're going to be in English. Mother Goose.
For the most part,
The
yeah.
Green Man. And then the ones that have specific names like Puck, Santa Claus. I think I already said Mother Goose, but the North Wind, Jack Frost, the Snowman, the Scarecrow.
You know these deities.
Davy Jones, Stormalong, the House Spirit. It's in English because we speak English.
Yeah. Well, what does his name mean? What? For the most part, that's a silly question. Well, what does his name mean? Well, it means frost. You know.
It's like Paul Bunyan. I've even seen people try to do etymology to figure out Paul Bunyan's name, and they claim it's tied to like some sort of slang for the French loggers for a specific tool. It's like, you guys are really reaching.
Yes.
And then here's the thing: is he was he
His
born?
name means Paul Bunyan.
Yes.
That's
Or-
all. That's
or
all that
Paul
we need.
Or Bunyan for short, depending on how you want to go about it. Johnny Appleseed. What is he? Well, his name's John, and he does stuff with apples.
Yes. Specifically, the seeds.
John Barleycorn, if you go back over to England, or Robin Hood, or Robin Woad. Except Hood and Robin used to have a very specific name for a deity or a spirit, and then Hood. Well, he's got a hood or woad. Well, hood also meant like the woods,
Right.
And then woad means mad, so it's the mad god, or the hooded god, or the god of the woods.
Yeah,
Hern the Hunter. It's a bit too straight.
There's actually a lot to it. So it is straight up, but there's also interesting linguistics behind it. But just don't get all crazy with etymology. That's it. Just beware.
Thunder makes the same sound wherever it is.
Etymology is fire. It is useful. It can enlighten an area, but it can also burn you to a fucking crisp if you're not careful with it.
Well, my general rule of thumb because I use etymology and linguistics as well, is if they can trace it directly, like they have effectively linear, but the moment it gets to like proto this or proto
Well,
that,
and typically
I'm out.
most of the etymology is actually just translations or definitions.
Well, it's like translating something from Old English to modern English. A lot of times it's just, they added a letter.
Yeah. But most of the time, all etymology is, for the most part, that's substantiated. It's mostly just definitions.
Well, it's like the ye old actually is pronounced the old or the old.
Yeah.
It's because
The
the
Y
Y
used
was
to be a
used.
TH.
Yeah, in some cases, and not always.
Yeah.
And then
like
you had
the Y. The Y has many rules. Well, one of the old rules, which fortunately has dropped off because otherwise it'd be really fucking confusing, is it used to make a TH sound. So Sometimes it makes an I sound. Sometimes it makes an E sound. Sometimes a long E sound, a short E sound, so on and so on. And then throw a TH in there. I'm glad that one fell off.
And it's still confusing because it's still E I O U and sometimes Y for vowels.
Except for when it's not.
Like just before, like I before E, except after C, and then it
Except
doesn't
for
follow that rule
there's
at
a
all.
bunch of words that doesn't follow that rule. All right. Actually, do we want to keep going or we want to cut her here because we're at the end of the time?
Well, I think we'll end it here, but I'll just say, here's the thing. Lore is everywhere. The mechanic lore, sea lore, family lore, the lore of man, the lore of woman, the lore of the forest, the lore of the sea, the lore of the road, the lore of the city, the lore of the country, the lore of history, and on 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 and on. So don't box yourself in. You probably know more lore than you think you do. And you're not as broken or lacking in that heritage of lore as you might think you are. And with that, for the final time of Season 4, Lore Keeper out.
All right, so, yeah, I think it was a fun season. We've grown a little bit throughout the season, thanks to you guys. I hope that you follow us on Patreon to keep updated with the website. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so that you can see when we come back. And until then, guys, just keep going and heal and reach out and learn and touch grass. I guess that's a new phrase. All right, see you guys when we come back.